Break's over, we're back to talking about the Hunger Games. Specifically, I want to talk about Volumnia Gaul, because I don't think that I've talked about her before, and she's really interesting. Starting first and foremost with her name, because I don't shut up about name symbolism over here. And here's the thing, Gaul by itself, interesting. Like, Gaul is interesting. Could be loosely associated with the historical region in Western Europe, inhabited by the ancient Gauls. Could be loosely affiliated with people, languages, stuff associated with France, especially in a historical context. Somehow I don't think that's totally where Suzanne Collins is going with it, because we know that Panem is the US, unless we're talking about like the Francophilia of it all, which is definitely possible. Especially when we could take into consideration that the most well-known Francophile in all of American history is Thomas Jefferson, who is interesting and complicated because of his relationship to slavery. Dr. Gaul's profession prior to becoming a game maker, also super interesting, also rooted in slavery. We're going to talk about that in just a second. Back to her name. The place where I think her last name is genuinely very interesting is because it is a homophone for Gaul, G-A-L-L, as in having the gall to do something crazy. But her first name is actually what I think is way more interesting than her last name, because her first name is Volumnia. And Volumnia is a Shakespearean name. And there's a lot of folks in the capital with Shakespeare names. But the reason why Volumnia is interesting is because the Shakespeare play that it's from is Coriolanus, as in Coriolanus Snow. So as if we didn't already have this implication that these characters were headed the same direction, these characters were going to end up allies to one another, which yes, we can apply that through various points in A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. This is interesting because Snow is distinctly lacking in a mother figure. Snow spends the bulk of his own story looking for a mother figure. And to some extent, we see him trying to find it in his grandmother and failing. We see him holding on to his mother's compact and ultimately basically throwing it away after using it to help somebody and following in the footsteps of something that his mother might have been proud of. And then ultimately, when it falls to the ground empty and it's full of dirt and mud, that's a pretty clear sign that he's rejecting it. We see him maybe looking for a mother figure in Ma, even if that would be a super hypocritical kind of problematic mother figure for him. But the mother figure that he ultimately finds is Volumnia, who in the play is Coriolanus' mother. And when we look at that character's role in the play, Volumnia in Coriolanus plays a huge role in Coriolanus' life. She is the one who encourages him in his military success. She is the one who encourages him to seek political office. When the people of Rome put her son Coriolanus in exile and he joins their military enemies. Does this sound familiar, by the way? Snow in exile and hanging out with the political enemies? Volumnia is the one who manages to play Coriolanus to not besiege Rome, and she ultimately becomes a hero to the city. And she's really interesting in a lot of ways if you look at the actual play. Basically, whenever any other woman anywhere in the text mentions something like sewing or dresses or butter, Volumnia shows up within 2 or 3 paragraphs just to be no, blood, swords, violence, all the bad things, because she is positioned as a military leader and political opponent in a way that none of the other women in the play are. Now let's transpose that to our Volumnia Gaul, because she does the exact same thing. And it's just so interesting on a name symbolism level. But names are not the only thing that's interesting about her, no. Because we know what her profession was prior to becoming a game maker. She was a doctor. Sure, that's why she's Dr. Gaul. But it's what kind of doctor she was. Because she was a gynecologist. She was an OBGYN. And that, by itself, interesting to some extent because somebody who has been responsible for bringing life into the world is now responsible for the Hunger Games, which take people out of it. But, that's surface level. We don't do surface level here. The history of gynecology is really, really, really bad. In 2018, New York City had to take down a statue of the father of gynecology because of how bad the history of that medical discipline is. Because it is rooted in slavery. It's rooted in experimentation on Black women. It is rooted in basically torture. It's really, really bad. And in retrospect, that also explains an awful lot about how women's healthcare is treated in the US, but that's kind of besides the point, not really. But everything is about layers and layers and layers with this woman, because she thinks that she is, in some very, very twisted way, preserving life, just only the life of people in the capital, is one way to look at it. But I think the more interesting read is that she is tied to that older history of experimentation and mutilation, and that's why she is the one responsible for mutts. and for the games, and for figuring out what twisted little games she can play with people in the capital too. She is so interested in how she can mold the little graduating class that Coriolanus is a part of. And we can see that in what she does to Clemencia. And by the way, yes, this is why I mentioned Thomas Jefferson before, if we're talking about famous Francophiles. And yes, I'm well aware that that one's a stretch. But I really do think it's so interesting, not just that Gaul is a woman, given the whole history of where gynecology comes from, but that in the movie version, they cast Viola Davis to play her. Which, like, on the one hand, we can take that as the casting directors not caring that much with what they were doing with that movie, which I don't think is true, because if that was true, I don't think we would have gotten Rachel Zegler. There is something to be said for the people who made that movie not paying enough attention to why the bloodbath not being there was significant, and that is something that I will take issue with probably forever. But I think the more interesting concept here is that that statement made by that casting decision has to do with how race and femininity are treated in the capital. And it opens up a lot of questions that we don't have answers to. There is not much in the text that indicates what the meaning of that choice is. But I really do think that so much about her comes back down to that name symbolism of it all. Because from the moment that she's introduced, we should be tying her and Coriolanus together in our heads, because she is the mother figure from the play that he is from, even if they seem to be at odds with each other at the beginning of the story. Just like, once again, Suzanne Collins doing the absolute most.